Welcome to day 90 of Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. This is on the calendar day. This is March 30th. So day 90, March 30th, Bible 365, which means that I am reading through the Bible in 365 days. So I'm taking 1 year to read through the Bible using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at the 1 year chronological Bible online.com, and then you just look for printable reading plan, something like that. Download a printable reading plan, and then you can read along with me. It is in chronological or historic order, which means it's this reading plan is the way it happened in history. So it gives you a nice detailed understanding of the Bible from start to finish, right? So what happened when we first meet God, and then what happened at the very end in the book of the Revelation to John. So let's get started. We are in the book of Joshua. And so today is Joshua 22 through 24. And again, it is March 30th, which means I think it's the end of the month. I might be off. Tomorrow might be the 31st. I don't know. I'll have to look at the calendar. But we are finishing the book of Joshua. So this is going to be check another book down. Hopefully everyone has been reading and sticking with me. The past couple days have been pretty dry when it comes to all the reading. It's funny enough that I thought most people would find Leviticus dry, and then I'm reading these like couple of pages where all the tribes have been given out, and I found that to be a little bit dry. So a lot of towns, a lot of kings' names, a lot of that kind of stuff, and it was just a repeat of giving out certain areas. However, always really good information and never anything that we want to skip over. So, but today we are coming to the end of this. Now, if you remember historically, we had, and some of this is going to go over this in the book, but we are following Joshua, who is now the leader of the Israelite people. He is the leader, sort of their king. He's not really designated as their king, but he is definitely their leader. And he's in charge of the 12 tribes of Israel. He has Eleazar is his head priest, who is the son of Aaron, who was Moses's brother. So we got Moses, we got Aaron. They've both died. Following them, Joshua and Eleazar, right? And they're sort of running the show, running the Israelite people. They have brought them into the land of Canaan. And so they've gone to war with all of these areas, and now they have designated all of the land in all of these areas. And so they're sort of settling down in a little bit more of a peaceful way. And one of the things that I noted in this reading today was that Israel, and this is what I love about what they were trying to portray with Israel, and I actually believe this is supposed to be true of those of us who follow Christ today. So if you are a Christian, right? So if you are a follower of Christ, and that's why you're here, because you want to understand more about that. I believe this is what we are also supposed to look like today. If you are not a believer, just sort of bear with me in trying to understand who the Israelites are, and then who, when you see Christian people, what the hope is that they would be like. So in this section, I noticed that Israelites love really big, and then they punish really big, right? So there is love and sharing in the community, and that's what God is asking for. And yet there is also rules and things to follow, and when they do not, there is punishment to be had for that. There is also patience. So God is really, really patient with these people. Very few do we see that do something wrong and then are immediately punished, right? We do not see that as often as we see long bouts of patience with the Lord, and then finally a punishment after days, years, months, or days, months, years, sometimes even generations of people not following the Lord. So I think that that's the recognition. So I believe that Christ followers are supposed to be doing the same. I think we're supposed to be loving huge, but we are also supposed to have for ourselves, right? For those of us who believe, right? Because this is for the Israelites, and the Israelites were the ones who followed God. This was not an expectation of those outside of Israel. right? Those outside of Israel, once they were in, like, right, so the foreigners, if you guys remember a few months back or a month back or whatever, the foreigners that came in, they were treated and were meant to behave exactly like the Israelites. But if you were outside of the land and you did not believe, these same stipulations were not put on you, right? So the Israelites were meant to love big, and they were meant to follow rules, and they were meant to punish justly. And I believe again that we as followers of Christ are to do the same. I feel like this seems to be a good rule to follow. Loving big is the key, because it's not just about punishment, right? And I want to bring a couple of these things up as they come through today, but it's not just like, so we're so right now, um, in the world that we're in now, we're either afraid to punish, or we want to punish too hard, or we want to punish the wrong people. Like, we love, as Christians, we love to punish those that don't even follow Christ, right? Like, our big goal is to try and tear people apart that have different values from us, that don't believe in Christ. And so even those things are funny. So we have to be really careful of some of those things. So anyway, going back to the beginning of this chapter. So remember, we're in Joshua 20 through 22. I don't even know if I said it, 22 through 24. We are finishing up this book for the day, and day 90, March 30th. So if I go back, and I want to start at 22 in the very beginning, because I always love to start in the first verse. So it says, then Joshua summoned the Reubenites. So he's just passed out all the tribal land, right? To all the 12 tribes, and then to all the Levites. So everybody got their area. Everyone was reminded of all of their areas, right? Inside the land of Canaan, outside the land of Canaan, right? Because those 2.5 tribes lived outside the land of Canaan. And then the Levites were scattered all throughout all of the tribes. All right, so then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, right? So these are the ones that live outside. You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites, but have carried out the mission of the Lord. So what he is doing is he is reminding them. Remember, in the beginning of this section, they had promised. God promised them the land on the outside of Israel. And I know I'm reminding you, so I won't be here too long. God promised them that land on the outside. But in order to promise them the land, so the women and the children all built up homes and cities and towns and lived in this area. But all of the men, all the warriors, soldiers, whatever it is you want to call them, they were to go in with the rest of the 12 tribes, and they were to go to war with them. And then once all of that settled, then God would give them the land that was promised them. So Joshua is fulfilling that promise in this section. So he is saying, you've done everything that we have asked you to do. You have followed the promise that you made to us. And now it is time for you to go back into the land. So I'm going to read verse 5. And if I can find it. All right, verse 5, it says, but here we go again. This is part of that, like, loving big, right? So love big. I promise you this land. I want you to have this land. Go and enjoy this land that I gave you. It's huge. I mean, it's a massive amount of territory. Go and enjoy it. I gave it to you because you asked for it. So God loves these Israelites and loves them enough to have given them this land that they asked for. But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience with him, to keep his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. So listen, this is not about following a bunch of rules. This is about, it's so much bigger than that. It is so much more than that. It's about putting God in front of everything. So it says, love the Lord. Great. Starts with your heart, right? Love the Lord. Because you love the Lord, you walk in obedience. Obeying is following the things that he's asked you to do. I can tell you that obedience has always been my downfall. I have fought tooth and nail to obey anyone who has ever tried to come up. Even now, like, and I know it's in my heart. I get it. Someone comes up and says, do this, and they don't ask nicely. Like, I immediately want to fight with them. And it's funny because I work in a school and I watch the kids do the exact same thing. We'll say, get in your classroom, and they automatically want to argue with you. Like, it doesn't matter. You have to say it in a certain way, or, they're not going to listen to you. And the reality is they are children. We are adults. We are in charge, and they're supposed to obey. And I know we don't like it. And I know we want to tell our kids now, don't blindly obey. But we're the adults in charge of the area. God is in charge of us. He runs the show. And we're like, I'm not going to listen to what you say. Listen, it's a downfall in your heart. It's a downfall in my heart when I say, I know you told me to do this, but I'm going to go my own way. And I don't want to get punished for it, right? Like, that's always been the case. When I was younger, I used to sneak out all the time. And so it would be, like 10, 11, 12 o'clock, and I would wait for everyone to fall asleep in the house, and I would sneak out. And if I was caught, I would make a million reasons why I had to sneak out or how I shouldn't be punished. Like, so I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I knew that I was breaking the rules, but I didn't want to get any trouble for it. I didn't want to pay the price for doing the things that I wanted to do. And if this rings any bells with you, then you probably have to accept that you're a little bit rebellious in your heart. And that's kind of against the love of God, right? Because if you love him, you will obey him. And if you don't obey him, there's this little piece in your heart that says you love yourself more because you think what you want to do is more important. So you love him, you obey him, you walk it because you walk in obedience. You keep his commands, and he gave you all these commands. He gave them all these commands at the very beginning, right? So they love him, they obey him, so they follow what he says, and they keep his commands, which isn't necessarily just obeying, right? So keeping his commands is loving others, right? No, not coveting, not right, doing all the sacrifices. So there are so many things. So these are all the commands that they need to keep. Hold fast to him. So remember him. Remember the promises, the things that he did. Remember the miracles that he did. So you stay close to him, because the further away that we are from him, the harder it is to follow him because we don't remember who he is. So you want to stay in close. You want to hold fast to him, and then serve him. Right? Here we go. We're being obedient. We're serving him with all of your heart. So with everything that is inside of you. When that heart wants to rebel, we need to turn that heart back to the Lord. That's what the holding fast is for. With all your heart and all your soul. So sort of with every single thing of your being, you are excited in some ways to obey the Lord, right? You are excited. And we're going to read some of this in the Psalms that David writes, his excitement in following the commandments. And then we're like, I'm not excited to love my neighbor who just let their dog poop on my lawn or something ridiculous, whatever. So, but the goal is, and I hate to say goal, but semantically, you understand what I mean? We want to serve him with all of our hearts and all of our minds. All right. So moving on from there, it says in verse 6, Joshua blessed them, which is something that we saw that Moses did, right? We saw Moses blessing people. Joshua blessed them and then sent them away, and they all went to their homes. So they all went back over towards the other side of the Jordan. Ready? So I believe they were on the west of the Jordan. I'm not amazing directionally. So the Jordan is down the center. Canaan, I think, is on the east, and then what is considered now Jordan and Syria is on the west, and that is where they are going. So they're heading over there. So we get big trifling when we start heading over. All right. So they left there, and then I want to read in verse 10. It says, when they came to Gilead, near the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. So they built what I'm going to say is a huge altar. So imposing is big and overwhelming. It's a huge altar. And the Israelites freaked out. And they were like, why are they going to build this altar? And they're like, we're going to war. Right? So they see this altar and it is offensive. This is not an altar that is necessarily an altar to God, right? All of those have been established through Eleazar and through Joshua, right? So they're a little bit freaking out. And so then what they do is they're like, we're going to go to war with them. So what they do is they appoint, I think it's Eleazar's son, Phinehas, and he's going to I just thought to myself, Phineas and Ferb. I don't know if any of you had kids that watch that show, but that always goes in my head with Phineas. So they had Phineas go over and talk to them. And so I love this. It's a little bit about communication. So they go over and say, why would you do this? This is against the Lord. You're going to give your offerings in an area you're not supposed to give offerings. You did it in our land. You're not supposed to have this here. The Lord has not approved of it. And they were like, whoa. That was never our intention. Our intention was never, this was never built to do sacrifices to, right? This was never for that. This was a reminder. So I think we do this generationally as well, right? This is a reminder. So they put it on the Israelite the side of the Jordan, right? And it's a reminder for both sets of tribes that in their generations that follow, it's a reminder to both sets that they are part of the Israelite people because they didn't live in the land of Canaan. They didn't want to be forgotten. They didn't want to be put aside as somebody different or as a different people group or as people that didn't follow God and they weren't what we would call now the chosen ones, right? So these 12 tribes were chosen to eventually have Jesus go through them, but they were chosen as God's people to live with God, right? So God spoke to them and they didn't want anyone to consider that they weren't that. So multiple generations to go down. So they made this for that reason. Once the Israelite people found out about that, they were overjoyed and they sent them on their way. And so what I want to do is I want to just talk about um, um, when they went over, one of the things that they did is so. And I'm going to read verse 27. So moving down just a little bit. In verse 27, it says, it's to be a witness between us and you and the generations that follow that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. Then in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to ours, you have no share in the Lord, right? So we got that down. So then he calls it, so in verse 34, it says, the Reubenites and the Gadites gave the altar this name, a witness between us, that the Lord is God. So another memorial to remember what they did, right? So another memorial to remember who they are. And I appreciate all of these things to remind all of these people who they are. And I probably said this before, I probably mentioned it before, but I never knew genetically what I was. My mother always called us Heinz 57, which kind of meant like we're a little bit of everything. And so we never had any kind of ethnic roots. And I never even thought about it growing up. It was never an issue to me. However, what it didn't do is there was no connection to any people group, and not in a way that would separate us from anywhere else, but in a way that would really draw us closer to anyone else, right? So there's something to be said when you have similarities that you in some ways draw closer to that. Like, for example, once I got pregnant, I remember when I got pregnant, anyone and everyone who had ever had a baby, all of a sudden they're your best friend, right? So like every woman who has had a kid recently or whatever, they all want to talk to you because there's something familial about it, right? Like there's this connection between us now. I had a kid, you, right? Or I'm pregnant with a child. You've been pregnant. You remember what it felt like to be pregnant. And so there are all these memories that come up. So there's this connection. So it's the same idea of how they want to stay connected. Now it's supposed to be good. Obviously it turns, which is always bad because in our natures, unfortunately, instead of bringing us together, it actually causes to separate because then you're like, well, we're this people group and we're the better version of this people group, right? So unfortunately, that same thing that's supposed to bring us together tends to tear us apart. But there is something beautiful about finding connections between families, right? So between things. So the altar is a witness. All right. And then the one thing that they did, and I don't think that they've done it yet, but I want to make sure. All right. So I don't think they've done it yet. So we're going to move on to Joshua 23. So in Joshua 23, starting in verse 1, it says, after a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel. All right. So he calls everybody in because he's dying. And this is a great prayer. So he calls everyone in. I don't want to say it's a prayer. Let me rephrase. He calls in everybody, the elders, the judges, everybody. And he says, I'm very old. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done. So he starts on this. He starts reminding them not of what he's done, because he did a lot. If you remember, like, he was a leader even before he was the leader of this the entire people group of Israel. He was Moses's, excuse me, he was like Moses's second hand man. He was always at the base of the mountain waiting for Moses, protecting Moses from anything that would happen up there, or, well, probably not because it was God, but anything that would happen below, right? Making sure that he didn't die or nothing bad happened to him. So he was kind of always in the mix of things. He was one of the ones when they went over into the land of Canaan the first time. He trusted the Lord, right? And he trusted that they would be able to go over there. So he was always doing some really good things. He does not talk about himself in this. He, again, talking about loving big, right? He talks about God. This was really important that as he's dying, and I just think again about now, and I want to be careful because I just feel always that need to be careful. But I think there's truth in the fact that when we are dying or when someone close to us dies, we only want to talk about them, right? They did this, they did that, they were such a great person. And there's value in that, right? But who made us, right? Like, he is, so much has happened in their lifetime, right? Joshua has lived through, he was in Egypt, right? So he was a slave in Egypt. He came up out of Egypt. He lived 40 years in the desert where his shoes didn't wear out and his clothes didn't wear out, right? So he went through a lot of hardship. He led a lot of wars. He met God, essentially, like he saw God coming down in a cloud of fire and a cloud of smoke, and right, and all these things. He led them through all these wars. And all he wants to do on his dying bed is to say, God did all of this for you, right? So he's dying. His life is over. He says, let me tell all of you, come to my bed and let me tell all of you who God is. You're going to say to yourself, they know. They lived it also. But what better leadership do they have than somebody saying that was a great leader and him saying, I owe it all to God, right? I owe this, I owe that. You owe this, you owe that. God did all of these things for you. And as I'm dying, I'm telling you, follow the Lord. Get rid of all that other stuff. Follow the God that did all of these things for you. Do not forget. Listen, he's dying. He's going to go be with the Lord. But he's worried because he's a leader. He is worried about his people and he wants them to stay close to the Lord. So he gives all of these honors and glories and all of this stuff to the Lord. He just keeps telling these people and reminding these people of who the Lord is. And so some of the things that he does and some of the things that he talks about. So I just want to hit on verse 6. All right. So in verse 6, it says, be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning aside to the right or the left. Don't associate with these other nations. So he goes on and on. He says, you're great because God made you great. Let's see verse 12. Verse 12, he says, but if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you will be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations. So listen, he's done all these things for you and he will continue to do all these things for you. But if you turn away from him, there's going to be punishment. Great love, great punishment. The Lord has given all these things. You turn away from him, the Lord will take all these things away. And that is a just punishment. It is not because he hates you. It is not because he's a dirty God. It's not because he's evil. It's not because he doesn't want you happy at the moment. It is because we are supposed to stay fully and completely connected with him. And when we stay fully and completely connected with him, he bestows amazing things. Whether, I'm not even talking about land or finances. He bestows great things on you when you stay close to him. And there is bad that comes when you don't stay connected to him. So in verse 15, it says, this is a tough one as well. Verse 15, it says, but just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened until the Lord your God has destroyed you from the good land he has given you. So this sounds a lot like what Moses said. Joshua, here we go, many years later, is repeating these same things because he's 110, I think it says, by the time he's dying, he's 110. And so So he's saying all these things. And he's reminding them constantly to just remember and be with God, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. And obviously we know that they get in trouble. So moving on, because he's going to pass away. And then we go to verse 1 in chapter 24. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And then Joshua said, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says." So he starts reminding them, going back to the beginning. He reminds them of Abraham. He reminds them of Isaac. He reminds them of Jacob and Esau. He reminds them of Moses and Aaron, the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. He reminds them of Balak and Balaam. So if you remember, Balak was the king who brought Balaam in to try and bless Balak's people and curse Israel. And Balaam couldn't do it. God didn't let him do it. So he did it the other way. And then he reminds them of Jericho, which again, they were at. So I want to read in chapter 4 or verse 14, not number 14. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped. These people, these hard-headed people, are still worshiping other gods. After all they've been through, the 40 years, going into the land, God promising them all things, they still had idols. And so they still followed other gods. And so God was like, throw all of those things away, right? We're starting fresh again. So I want to say giving him another chance, another covenant. We see him do this over and over again. So if you've been with me from the beginning, it started with Abraham. And then it was renewed with Noah. It started with Noah, and then it was renewed with Abraham, and then it was renewed again with Isaac, and renewed with Jacob, right? And then it was renewed when he came in and he took all the Israelites out of there. And then here we see this again with Joshua. So there is sort of like, in a way, I want to say there's sort of like a fresh start. And so he just continues to say, continues to tell them to turn away from their gods and then you do all of these things, right? From here on out, I want you to follow all of these things, all of my commandments, and follow me. And then I will stay with you, or those other things will happen. And then in verse 19, I don't love this verse as much. Joshua said to the people, "You are not able to serve the Lord. He's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you." The people were like, "No way. We're good. We're going to follow." And then Joshua says, "You're witnesses against yourselves." And they're like, "Yep, that's good. We're witnesses." So he says, "Okay, throw everything away, and then you're going to serve the Lord." And then Joshua makes a covenant with the people. So here we go again, and again, I'm saying fresh. It's in some ways, it's renewing the covenant that they already have. And he made it with there at Shechem. And then they put this stone up. So we've also been reminded a lot about stones. And so they put this stone up as a witness. So in some ways, I think the stone is maybe an allegory is the wrong word, maybe a representation, but it's always around something, a witness for God, right? Jacob had one under his head. The tribes, if you remember when they crossed over the Jordan, the tribes put giant stones up and made an altar, and put all the commandments on there. And so these stones are sort of representations of God, right? And so this is something to remember them by. And so they put this stone up. And then in verse 29, we're going to see, after these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in his land, and then they took Joseph's bones, and they buried Joseph's bones. So if you remember, they had them in Egypt. So they which they had them for hundreds of years. And so they brought those bones and they buried those bones where Joseph's land was. And so that land that was bought by Jacob. So, and then in verse 33, it says, "And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died and was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas in the hill country of Ephraim." So at this point now, in some ways, the second set of leaders died. So remember, Moses and Aaron were the original who led these people out of Egypt. And now we had Joshua and Eleazar who led them into the land of Canaan. So they have these distinct differences in the land of, in the people of Israel. They are now established. They are in the land. The land is peaceful, and the land has been peaceful for some time. And then these two have died, and then we're going to have other people that have to take over. So we're going to see who takes over from here. We're starting the book of Judges tomorrow, and we're going to see where that takes us. If this has been a blessing to you guys, I want you to like the video. I want you to share it, subscribe to the channel, because then this will come to you every single day, which I hope that's what you want. I hope you're reading and sticking with me. So see you next time. Keep reading your Bible, and that's it. See you tomorrow.